Everybody knows that the jighead minnow is an absolute fish catching machine, and in today's video we're going to break down my cheat code for how I've been having success fishing the jighead minnow this fall. So let's get into it, guys. Bro,
those are bass, dude. They're right on top of the water column. That's crazy, dude. That's fun.
There we go.
Man, this is fun.
All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Like you saw in the intro, we're talking about the jighead minnow. You know, this technique has just changed the tournament scene like crazy. Everybody's doing it, but it can be intimidating if you've never done it before. You know, you're just trying to get your feet wet on the jighead minnow. So I struggled when I first started. I just felt like a complete idiot, like I had no idea what I was doing. But really, this year I took the time, I focused on honing in my minnow skills, getting better using forward-facing sonar. And so really the last 2 to 3 months, I've been fishing the minnow a lot. And over that little bit of time, I've kind of developed my routine of which jig heads I throw, which minnows I throw, what size, because every different group of fish is different, right? They could be feeding on gizzard shad closer to the bottom. They could be feeding on small threadfin shad close to the surface. So, you've got to have different setups for that. Different jig heads, different minnows, and every jig head is different. Every minnow is designed different. They all have a different type of action, and every fish is different, right? So I'm gonna break down the best that I can all these baits, use some underwater footage, of these minnows paired on the correct jig head that I like, that are the most successful from my experience. So there's a lot of guys that'll throw those real big minnows, and I just have not had a ton of success doing that. I typically like to stay in that 2 3/4 inch range to 5 1/2. So like those 3 to 4 inch minnows, I've had the most success fishing here on the Tennessee River and on like Smith Lake, deep spotted bass lake, blueback herring lake. They really like those smaller style jighead minnows. So I keep it simple. I only use 2 different size jig heads. Even though that I've got about 4 or 5 different jig heads right here on the deck, there are only 2 different sizes, and that is the 3/16 and the 1/8 ounce. So when I'm fishing a 3/16, that's what I'm going to be doing most of the time. It really allows the bait to get down deeper, fishing all the way up to like 20 to 25 feet. If the fish are on the bottom, you can work it and really hover it in that strike zone, but you can also burn it and get it up higher up in the water column if you want to. So I think 3/16 is really one of the most universal jig head sizes. The other one I use is an 1/8 ounce. So I'll use the 1/8 ounce if I'm fishing like really shallow water. Anything less than 10 feet, if they're close to the bottom of the lake, that's what I'm going to be throwing, because I want those fish to rise. And a lot of times, like I found them on Gunnersville the other day, these fish were in like suspended in like 30 feet of water, but they were right up under the surface. I thought it was like eelgrass floating, and then they started blowing up. I was like, wow. So I tied on the 1/8 ounce because the 3/16 ounce was too heavy, and it was falling down below them. And you always want to keep that jighead minnow above the fish's head. That just seems to be the only way that they'll eat it for me. Most of the time you'll have that rare fish every now and then that'll go down on it, but for the most part they want it above their heads. And so picking up that 1/8 ounce, throwing it right behind the fish and just bringing it right over their heads, they couldn't stand it. They just chomped that thing. So 3/16 ounce and 1/8 ounce are the 2 sizes. So now we're going to get into the actual jighead brands, jighead designs, and the minnows. So my most successful like 1-2 punch right here on the TVA, Gunnersville and Wheeler Lake primarily, are these 2 bad boys, and they're 2 total different sizes, and I've got them on 2 different jig heads. So this one right here is what I've been using to target some of those bigger fish and the fish that are feeding up on those bigger baits like gizzard shads and stuff. But I've noticed a lot of times, and it's not always small fish that nip at this, some larger fish that are feeding on those really small threadfin shad, they won't eat this. They'll just come up and nick at it and miss it. And so I've been following up with this guy right here. So what's different about these baits, right? Now this jig head right here is a decoy VJ30. It's just a typical ball head, nothing fancy about it. You got your line tile on the top. That's really important for jig heads. But with this one, this is the larger profile. This is the Beast Coast Seduce minnow. It's a newer bait. And I'll have direct links down to Tackle Warehouse for everything that I talk about in this video. But this thing has just a tremendous smell. First off, that's one of the first things I noticed when I got it out of the pack. It just smells awful. But the fish love it. But it's a really good design, and it's some really high quality plastic. That's what I like about this. You can really catch a lot of fish on this. It's got a perfect little slot for your hook, and the split tail. And this one just pairs really good on the VJ30 jig head. And so the VJ30, I'm not, you know, you hear about these rolling action minnows and all that, but that's not really what you get out of this jig head. You get more of that traditional, just pop and bouncing style. And that's why this larger 5 1/4 inch Seduce minnow works so good on it. So it's a bigger profile, a little bit wider, so it's not going to get as much roll if you were to put it on, you know, a rolling style jig head. But you know, just that traditional bouncing, keeping the rod tip down or keeping it up and just bouncing while you reel is really the best retrieve on this thing. And so I've been catching a lot of fish on this guy. As you can see, this thing's all tore up. We caught some spots and some largemouth this morning on it. But yeah, the VJ30 and the Beast Coast Seduce minnow has been my go-to right now for those larger fish. And really, about 90% of the time, if I'm wanting that traditional bounce, you know, traditional minnow style presence, the Decoy VJ30 is the best jig head. It's just got a really good stout hook. It's got a good keeper on there. So like I said, you can catch, I've caught like 5 or 6 fish on this one minnow before, and still rocking it. And that's pretty impressive compared to other minnows on the market. You know, a lot of times they're that really soft plastic and they just tear after a bunch of fish. So I typically throw this one first on any group of fish, because typically the larger fish are going to eat that. But then I follow up with the Berkeley 4-inch flat nose minnow, and this is going to really mimic you can, you know, mimic those smaller gizzard shad, but primarily the threadfin shads. And so those threadfin eaters really like this bait. It's got a lot wider tail than the Seduce minnow, and if you notice, it's a different jig head. So this is the Owner range roller, and what I like about this, see how narrow this bait is? So anytime that you have a narrower profile plastic, that's going to allow the bait to roll more. You know, any bait, you know, chatterbait using trailers and stuff, you know, lipless cranks, it's easier to be able to roll. So with this range roller head, I really like using especially the 1/8 ounce in this, but I've got some on the 3/16 ounce too if I want that rolling action for those deeper fish. But that's the design on this bait. You know, it's a little bit slimmer. It's got a different, it's not a standard ball head type design. That little bit of indention right there on the head is going to allow it to roll, disperse a little bit more water, and kind of kick it. And so you want a bait that's going to be slim, like this flat nose minnow, to allow that jig head to get the most action, you know, the way that it was designed for. And it's got a solid keeper on there. So keepers are really important with all these minnow style baits because they are soft, like really soft plastic material, and they just rip after after several fish, or sometimes after one fish. I will say the flat nose minnow will catch them, but you're lucky to catch more than one fish on each bait. They just rip so easily. So those two are really that's kind of my 1-2 punch. Any lake that I go, those two, if one of those doesn't catch them, the other one will. Like about 100% of the time this fall. I haven't went a single day to any of these lakes this fall and not caught a fish on one of those two baits. But, you know, there's also a lot of other baits that you can throw. And there's so many jig heads and different minnows on the market. Like, I'm one of those guys that buys stuff and tests them out. You know, I saw the Seduce minnow on Tackle Warehouse. I was like, wow, that thing looks really good. So I bought it, tested it out. I saw Lucas when I was filming him, you know, fishing the flat nose minnow. Saw how he caught him. I was like, that thing works. So, you know, I tested them out and have had tremendous luck. But we've got several honorable mentions right here. The XZONE Lures Rally Shad. It's really similar to that Beast Coast minnow. This is the 4.5-inch Rally Shad, and this is the Beast Coast minnow. They've got a similar presence. Obviously this one's bigger, but like the design as far as the body going down, and then the tail, split tail. Having a split tail is really important in my opinion. But Rally Shad's good. I also throw it on the VJ30. And, you know, I haven't really mentioned colors much. Obviously, any type of color that mimics bait fish well. I like, you know, like your Tennessee shads, gizzard shad color, threadfin shad color, chrome, you know, anything with a bunch of flake, especially if you're in clear water, sunny days, you know, stuff like that. And if it's cloudy days, you're going to want something a little bit more dull like this. This is the Tennessee shad, something that's not as shiny. You know, this is kind of dull. It just blends in well. The fish can't see it as good, but you know, obviously they see it, and I think that just really gets a lot more of those fish that follow to commit and actually bite. And then back to another rolling style jig head. Really the range roller and this one is the only two that I've been fishing a lot that really have that good rolling action that I've actually liked and caught fish on. And this one is the DUCKETT sway minnow. So this is the sway, whole sway system. They've got a head which is called the sway head, and then the sway minnow. They were both designed to, you know, to be fished together. Now you can use the sway head with a different minnow, but typically I'll swap to that range roller if I'm doing a different minnow. So this is a cool design. So it's similar to the design of the range roller, you know, except this one, the indentation on the jig head is down. So it's supposed to create like that low center of gravity and allow it to roll more. But one thing that's really cool about this jig head is the keeper on it. It's really, really good. You can catch a lot of fish on these minnows just because of the keeper, and you know, the plastic itself is good. But so this minnow has these, I want to say they call them like the Sora Batu wings. It's kind of similar to the Sakamata shad, but it really allows that bait to get that rocking action, especially with the design of that head. It's designed to have that water bounce off the wings to allow it to float, but also, you know, the way that the minnow and the head's designed allows it to rock. But there's a lot of different colors in the sway minnow. I've caught several fish on it, and I've actually caught fish on the minnow on more of your standard jig head, like the XZONE Lures jig head. I've got one right here, and paired up with this little sneaky bait. This is actually called the stealth minnow. This was actually one of my first baits that I started gaining confidence with jig head minnow fishing, and this was like 2 falls ago that this came out, or it might have been last fall. I think this was 2 falls ago that this bait came out. And this is a 2 3/4 inch bait. So first time I ever fished this, you know, I was like, man, I'm gonna catch some crappie or something. And we went to Smith Lake. I was throwing a bigger minnow style bait, and they just, you know, they would follow it and they just wouldn't eat it. And so I tied this on this XZONE jig head. This is a 3/16 ounce jig head. But it's also got that similar design to the VJ30, you know, that traditional pop-in jig head minnow presence, and it pairs really well with this stealth minnow. So like we caught so many fish. Obviously you're not going to catch a ton of big fish unless they're just really locked in on them small threadfin shad, but like on Smith Lake on that day we caught a ton, but they were all small. But they wouldn't eat anything else other than this little thing that we threw at them, because it just mimicked the bait fish so well. Like September through November, they just really get locked in on these small threadfin shad, and you've got to mimic that bait fish really well, and this bait does a great job of it. So guys, if I'm throwing a 3/16 ounce jig head, as far as my rod setup, I like a 7-foot medium. This one's a DUCKETT Micro Magic Pro, and this is a Cast King Skeet Reese reel, 6:2 to 1 gear ratio. Well, somewhere in that mid range, like the 6 to 7s, low 7s, mid 6s. This is really good size as far as your reel for this technique. And then I do like a little mono backfilling on this reel to 15 or 20 pound braid, and then a couple feet of 8 pound or 10 pound Yoziri fluorocarbon as a leader. And that's for my 3/16 setup. And when I'm throwing that smaller minnow or dropping down to the 1/8 ounce jig head, I'm gonna swap to the 6/8 medium DUCKETT Pro Series. And this really allows you to get some of those really subtle pops out of the bait, especially if you're wanting that bait to roll and stuff. And I really like that rolling action out, you know, when I'm swapping to the 1/8 ounce jig head. Just below the surface, I really like that rolling action. But for me, I like, you know, when I'm fishing the deeper water on the 3/16 head, I feel like that traditional popping action like the Decoy VJ30 and the XZONE jig head do. Personal preference. I'm sure some of you will disagree with me, but same thing as far as the line. Do that mono backfill into braid, and then the fluorocarbon leader. You know, this one's that Shimano Nasky reel. Both are really great reels, especially at an affordable price point. But these rods are great, reels are great, and this is really how I've found the most success fishing the jig head minnow. So guys, I hope this video helps you understand more about, you know, when you're choosing your baits. I hope it helps you understand more and know which ones to choose, because I've had a lot of success. You know, I've also went through a lot of different jig heads, a lot of different minnows. A lot of them aren't that great, but these are the best ones. And like I said, I'll have everything linked down to Tackle Warehouse. So if you're interested in buying some of these baits, please do so. Please take that link. I'm not gonna hide it from you. I do receive commission from those. So if you're a longtime viewer or subscriber of the channel and you like seeing this type of content and you want to catch some fish on the minnows, please go use that link, purchase some of these. It helps out the channel, helps fund me making these videos. But guys, I want to thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment down below on what your favorite jig head minnow, you know, jig head and minnow style bait setup is. And let me know what you think. You know, have you tried some of these baits? Have you tried some of these jig heads? What is your overall thought? Let me know down in the comments. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.